Hello. The Divine Code reading for March 14th, pages 561 and 562. I'm also going to include 563 as we're doing the introduction to a new section, and that makes it complete. The Prohibition of Theft. This is part 7 of the eventually 8-part Divine Code. There are 16 chapters in the Prohibition of Theft. 6 of the chapters are in the current edition. That's the second edition of the Divine Code. They've been translated from the Sheva Mitzvahs Hashem books that are in Hebrew, and the other 10 chapters will be made available in a hopefully soon to be released complete version of the Divine Code. So in the current book, Chapter 1, Prohibition of Theft. Chapter 2, Laws of Returning Stolen Objects and Restitution for Theft. Topic number 3, Prohibitions of aiding theft, having benefit from theft, or buying stolen property, and the laws of unintentional theft. Chapter number 4, Laws of saving oneself or one's property at the expense of another's money and taking the law into one's own hands. Chapter 5, Theft incurred by false measurements and the prohibition of cheating or misinforming another person. Chapter 6, the prohibition of extortion and forcing a purchase. Now, what will be available in the upcoming, now some of this was already published in what's called the special edition of the Divine Code. And then the rest of it is coming out in the upcoming complete edition of the Divine Code. Chapter number 7, Laws of borrowing, renting, watching an entrusted item, and holding collateral for a loan. Chapter 8, Stealing or encroaching upon real estate property. Chapter 9, Prohibition of kidnapping or stealing enslaved persons. Chapter number 10, the prohibition of rape and laws of taking captives. Chapter number 11, bodily injury and damaging another's property. Chapter number 12, the laws of the delinquent debtor and one who withholds payment owed to a hired person. Chapter 13, the laws of a worker in regard to the employer. Chapter 14, government authority, the laws of land conquested in war. Chapter 15, laws of ownerless items and finding lost objects. And finally, Chapter 16, actions similar to theft, forbidden as destructive to society. The introduction by Moshe Weiner, Jerusalem, Israel. And Moshe Weiner is the author of the Sheva Mitzvahs Hashem book, which has been translated into the Divine Code. So he is writing the introduction to the unit on the prohibition of theft. The prohibition of theft is unique in that it affects almost every aspect of a person's life. Since humans are social beings who must deal with each other continuously in buying, selling, exchanging, etc., one is always dealing with others, either in person or remotely. The focus of this commandment is to accept and honor the other person, his needs, and his possessions, as the sages taught. And this is in Tractate Avot, which is the Wisdom of the Fathers, or Sayings of the Fathers. Chapter 2, 12, Rabbi Yosei said, "Let the money of your fellow be as dear to you as your own. So theft is a different theft in its different forms causes corruption and deteriorates and endangers the society until the brink of destruction. So there are three laws which are between man and man, if we don't count Denham, but there are three laws which are considered to be between man and man. That's the prohibition of adultery, the prohibition of murder, the prohibition of adultery, and now the prohibition of theft. All three of these between man and man are just, we have to build society, and these three are necessary for the building of society. In addition to the laws to establish courts of law, which kind of wraps together all three of these laws for the building of society. The lesson was learned by humanity in ancient times, from the generation of the flood. From what occurred to them, we see how harsh is the punishment for theft. The degree of their annihilation was only sealed because it committed rampant theft, even though they were very sinful with respect to all the divine commandments. And that would be all seven of the divine commandments. It would be the ones between man and God, as well as the ones between man and man. But what the sealing was, the final, there was a decree against humanity because of the rampant violation of God's laws for humanity. The final thing that there wasn't a way to get back, there wasn't a way to get away from it, was because of the violation of the prohibition against theft. That was the final step that destroyed humanity, that sealed humanity's fate at the time of the flood, of Noah's flood. We could read about this in Tractate Sanhedrin 108a and cited by Rashi in Genesis 6:13. As it says in Genesis 6:13, the end of all flesh has come before me, because the world is full of robbery, and behold, I will destroy the world. For all the Noahide laws, the basic command is from God himself to mankind. These are basic necessities that mankind cannot evade at any time or in any way. And they were given to human beings to maintain their proper existence. Therefore, you must realize that the truth of these commands is that they are for your own good and the good of the whole world. The other unique point is that in order to justly accept others as equal to yourself, you must honor them and their property. And this requires inner insight and positive feelings towards others. This comes from the recognition that you, exactly like your fellow human beings, are created by the same God for the same duty and purpose. Therefore, no individual is more important than another to say that his needs come totally before the needs of another person. Hence, keeping this command keeps you continuously aware of the Almighty, who is continuously creating and watching everyone and everything with his divine providence, for the specific purposes that he expects from mankind in general and each person in particular. So God created the universe, and we have to understand that it's a continuous creation. At every moment, God is creating the universe. And to recognize the other person as a legitimate human being means recognizing their right, or that they have what they possess in a proper way, because God is continuously creating it. And that's where it is. And by recognizing the dignity and the legitimacy within another person, which is on a continuous basis um, being upheld by the prohibition of theft. If the prohibition of theft were violated, it would also make it easier to violate the prohibitions against murder and the prohibitions against adultery. Theft is the prohibition against theft is the mortar that holds society together. And therefore, in the time of the flood, when these other things had broken down, it was possible if they held to the prohibition against theft, if they kept the prohibition against theft, the difficulties with murder and adultery would have come back around and would have been fixed because people would respect each other and they would stop murdering and stop committing adultery. But with theft being rampant, there was nothing to bring everything back together. And that's why theft is a sort of a linchpin that holds the rest of society together, the prohibition of theft. Another focus of this commandment, which is only another aspect of the fine point, is your need to be just and truthful. You must contemplate that being just and truthful is not only for the upkeep of society, but also for your own sake and benefit. So it's not only the other person that benefits from this. And being just and truthful, it's not only for the other person's sake, but it's also for one's own sake, that one should be just and truthful. Being truthful is being correct with yourself. And this makes you fit to recognize your own true virtues, capacities, needs, and duties. No one knows each individual person and his needs better than the Creator himself. And this is discussed by the Rambam in the Fundamentals of the Torah, chapter 2, topics 8 to 10, and Lukuti Amarin, page 60, both A and B. The only way you can maximize your abilities is by doing your duty in being the person God created for specific purposes. For the specific purposes He has planned for you. By cleaving to His commandments and the patterns He set out for the lifestyle He assigned for mankind, as opposed to the lifestyle He assigned for animals. But you need a vessel in which to receive this pattern of life, to accept it, and to manage to live accordingly. The vessel is truth. So by truth, it would appear from that this is referring to having a clear understanding of the world, to have a clear understanding of the way the world was created by God. And by seeing things in a truthful manner, that allows the person to be able to function in a proper way in these areas, and to be able to see what his own value is and what his duty is, what his job is in this life. That God has placed him in this life with certain things and certain jobs to do, and by seeing things clearly and not trying to take things from other people, but looking, sort of contemplating what he has and where his life is, he can better understand these things. These things will become clear to him as well. This explains the special importance of the prohibition of theft. You are obligated to be extremely careful not to steal, since there are many details. A person's nature is to covet another's possessions, and his evil inclination tricks him with false excuses for why this is permissible. These details will help you focus on God, His truth, and your own truth. So the major difficulty with understanding truth, with what's being described here as truth, that's having clear vision, is coveting what other people have, which clouds up that clear vision, because we have what we have for a reason, and they have what they have for a reason. And to covet what the other person has, to desire it or to dwell upon and try to think of ways to acquire something that belongs to another person, clouds the clear vision that's being described here as truth. Within the 7 Noahide commandments, each one has a negative aspect. Do not commit. At the same time, each one has a positive aspect and teaching that molds you into a better person. You should exert extra effort to learn and understand the general prohibition of theft and its details, so you can merit to be careful and not to transgress it even by mistake. Likewise, it is an obligation to contemplate your actions in order not to fall mistakenly into theft, since it is likely to occur when you are not taking careful notice of your actions. So every day there's interactions and there's places where a person could, if he's not paying attention, he could wind up stealing things. And this does exist to some extent within American society. There's casual attitudes that people have of taking things. Businesses might put out napkins for their customers, paper napkins for their customers. If somebody has a runny nose and he's walking down the street with a runny nose, or he gets a scratch, and he just walks into the restaurant, the napkins are right there on the counter. They're not being guarded, and a person just takes a napkin or two for his own use, but he's not a customer. That might be considered theft, unless there's a sign on it. Help your public can help themselves. Likewise, let's say if a person's at a restaurant and they're drinking coffee, and the waitress brings a quantity of coffee creamer in little cups. These little cups are portable. They have covers on them. They're portable, and people might put a few in their bag to use later. And that's not what it's there for. It's to be used with a cup the coffee that's being poured, being served in the restaurant. It's not for someone to take home. That would be considered theft, unless the restaurant had a policy where they're allowed to take a couple extra home. We have such a casual attitude towards these kinds of theft that we don't even think of it as theft. And this is what's being described here. We have to constantly be on guard, because there are things that are just so part of our society that we don't even think of it as being wrong. And we have to be constantly reviewing and constantly thinking about and constantly having our eyes open to how we're living in these areas. Learning the details of the prohibition of theft will correct your thoughts, your actions, and you as a person. So studying Torah, and for a non-Jew, that's studying the 7 laws in all its details, and its details go into a very wide ranging of things. Behind me, I've got the rules of copyright, the rules of civil law, rules of tzedakah, rules of other people's money, more laws on money. These things. There's lots and lots of halakha involved with the prohibition of theft, and we have to study these things. We have to study them out in detail. We have to continuously be studying it, so we're continuously, it's on the forefront of our mind, so we don't fall into these traps, which in society, these traps are all over the place, and people, it's very easy to fall into them. and we have to be on guard. This, in turn, allows you and eventually all humanity to appreciate the truth and justice of God's being the king over the entire world. The fulfillment of the Noahide laws, and especially the laws of theft, helped perfect the world under kingship of the Almighty, the opposite of the world's destruction that was caused by the generations of the flood. With this, we can merit the fulfillment of God's promise in Isaiah 11:9. They will not harm or destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God as water covering the seabed. And that's the introduction to the prohibition against theft. And the next reading will be beginning chapter 1. Thank you.